Your Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. I'm finally actually recording another episode during the day because, I have off for my job today. So I'm just glad I'm able to record this at a reasonable time and not ridiculously late at night. But welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at @L_Penguins. A lot to get to today, including a big announcement about the league updating their protocols to go in line with the NFL and the NBA. Evgeni Malkin talked to the media for the first time in 6 months today, touched on when he thinks he's going to return, his contract status, all of that, just how long he wants to continue playing. And I'll also have thoughts on just the recent wave of postponements, especially up in Canada, and why I think for these latest reasons, it's not even really COVID related. I just think it's a bunch of BS. But starting off today's show, we do have that big announcement from the NHL. This comes courtesy of Elliot Friedman. He tweeted out everything. So in accordance with the new CDC guidelines, which says if you test positive and you don't have a lot of symptoms, you can leave isolation after 5 days. And the NHL and those Players Association, they have agreed to the possibility of the vaccinated players leaving isolation 5 days after a COVID test if they have no symptoms or the symptoms are resolving. But the key phrase in that, one big thing, it's providing such exit is permitted by your local health authorities. So what does that mean for the Penguins? It means that it's much more likely that the players will be able to leave earlier than if this team was up in Canada. I feel bad for a lot of the Canadian fans up there just because I feel like it's going to be a lot trickier with the Canadian teams just because of how the local health authorities, they're much more, what's the word I'm looking for right now, strict when it comes to COVID, especially the Canadian government. Northern California, that's a big one as well. They're also a lot more strict. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens up there with the Canadian teams, with the breakouts that they have. Will they be able to leave COVID protocol as early as some U.S.-based teams will? That, I think, is going to be the big question that the league is going to want answers from with the Canadian government. I knew as soon as the CDC made this announcement on Monday, it was only going to be a matter of minutes, if not hours, until we see the leagues go in line with that. And the NBA was first, then it was the NHL yesterday, and then the NFL yesterday, and then it was the NHL today. And, it's a big deal with the NFL as well because their protocol stated that if a player was unvaccinated and they tested positive, which happened yesterday with Colts quarterback Carson Wentz, he was not going to be allowed to come back for 10 days. He was going to have to miss Sunday's game no matter what, just because he's unvaccinated. But now, with these updated protocols, it even goes to unvaccinated players. If he can test negative a couple times in a row and is able to get over COVID quick, he will be eligible to play in a massive game for the Colts because they they're in a playoff spot right now in the AFC wildcard race. And if he were not eligible to play, they would have had to gone to their backup quarterback by the name of Sam Ehlinger, quarterback out of Texas. And that would have not been good because, this has been one of the hottest teams in the NFL. But again, due to these updated protocols, it looks like he is now going to be eligible to play if he can test out of COVID a couple times negative. So again, what this means for the Penguins with their outbreak, this is huge. So a lot of their players are asymptomatic, at least according to Mike Sullivan. If they can test out of it in the next few days, they should be good to go for Sunday against the San Jose Sharks. So that is just huge right there. I'm not sure which players have had mild symptoms versus which players have not had mild symptoms. But it all remains to be seen which players would be able to come out of COVID protocol in the next few days so the Penguins can play that game on Sunday. Outside of that, though, the Penguins did have, a little bit, more bad news with COVID protocol today. Kasperi Kapanen has joined some of his other teammates in COVID protocol. I believe the number is now up to 8 Penguins in COVID protocol. This outbreak is just as bad, if not worse, than what we saw at the beginning of the regular season. I would probably put up there saying it is just as bad. I know Mike Sullivan has not tested positive again. Knock on wood, he does not. But it's still pretty bad just because the team had no positive COVID cases before the early holiday break, and now they have 8. So, I mean, that early holiday break, it looks like, really didn't do much at all just because, more players continue to test positive. And, going back to, just the overall announcement, Elliot Freeman said, the negative test and the clearance also mandatory to exit the isolation. We are going to see how different players and teams are affected. But from what I've heard, the teams and players seem very happy with this news. And again, we will see how local authorities react. So there's the news on all the COVID front. The Penguins did have practice again today. Evgeni Malkin was a full participant, took full contact, and looks like he was finally back in his normal spot, playing second line center. To Sidney Crosby was playing on a line with Danton Heinen and Jeff Carter. And I know some people are probably reading into that second line a little bit just because, Carter can play wing and has played wing in the past. But I still think this team is a lot more dangerous when Carter is, playing in that third line center role, right? It's the deepest, center pool that this team has had since Nick Bonino was the third line center in 2016 and 2017. I would chalk Carter right up to him. I know he hasn't had that same level of playoff success that Bonino did have in 2016 and 2017. I mean, Carter was really good against the Islanders in that series and was really good in the regular season, but still has just a tad way to go before he gets up to the legend that was Nick Bonino on that HBK line. But still, this is a player that's been awesome since coming over from Los Angeles. This team is a lot more dangerous when he is playing the third line center. I would like to think that Mike Sullivan is going to keep that going once Geno officially returns. And we're going to get to that here in just a few minutes. I know some people on Twitter were talking about the potential lines, or a potential third line of Zucker, Rodriguez, and Kapanen. I would be intrigued with that, but I'm still not sure how Kapanen would play with Rodriguez. I know Erod has been really good this year. He's been one of their top 3 best players, and is going to get a massive raise after the season is over. But is Kapanen really going to get back to last year's form if he's playing with Rodriguez and Zucker? That's my thing. I just don't see it, and the team needs more out of him, considering the price that Rutherford gave up to get him. He has not lived up to that this season. I know he did last year, and I was eating crow for a little bit just because I wasn't a huge fan of the trade at the time. But this year, it's all come crashing down, and he's having just a horrific season despite the underlying numbers being mostly pretty good. He's not finishing, and the eye test is not matching up with the numbers just because he looks lost out there on a nightly basis, yet the numbers are telling a completely different story. So it's interesting to see the dynamic between those two things. I would like to think that Kapanen is going to be reunited with Malkin once he's ready to play. So we'll just have to see with that. But, that line with Rodriguez, Zucker, and Kapanen, when they've played together, per Adam Gretz of Pittsburgh, it's looked pretty good this year. Apparently, he has said they've played over 100 minutes together so far this season, have dominant possession numbers for expected goals, scoring chances for, high danger chances, and they've outscored the opposition 7-0 when they've been on the ice. So I will be curious to see if Sullivan gives that line a little bit more juice if this team ever does get fully healthy. But again, at the end of the day, I still think the more likely scenario is Sullivan going to be reuniting Zucker with Malkin and Kapanen with Malkin as well, just because, Kapanen played his best hockey with Geno again last year. And I think they want to see if they can get Jason going as well once he's eligible to come back. Remember, he is week to week at this point with that injury that has been nagging him for a while. That is the latest updates from today's practice. Again, coming up in the next segment, we're going to go into Evgeni Malkin, go into his comments about his contract situation, what the contract I would offer to him would be, and when it looks like he will be making his return to the lineup. Hint, it will not be this Sunday. But before we do that, it is the new year. So that means New Year's resolutions. if yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar as well. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring by like week 3, you might be thinking, this is just not worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Most of them contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. If you compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs, it's really not even close. Even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and is good for you. That way, when you enjoy a delicious Built Bar, you can almost count it as a workout. You can go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at _Penguins. So let's get into Geno's comments today. And there was a pretty good one in here. And this is just typical Geno fashion right here. So he was asked by the media today, just, what are your thoughts on the contract? What's the update going on? Didn't really provide an update, but had this great line saying, I'm not thinking about money. I'm a pretty rich guy. And then he flashed a grin. A typical Geno kind of answer. He also confirmed to the media and to the fans that he's looking to only play for 3 to 4 more years. So this next contract that the Penguins will likely give him, hint, hint, he's probably not going to walk to free agency here, people. It will probably be his last in the NHL before he retires, maybe goes back to Russia, plays in the KHL for a year or two, and then calls it a career for playing hockey. I honestly do think the Penguins will be able to get Geno on a nice discounted rate. I don't think he's going to get anywhere near $99.5 million on this next contract. I mean, when he signed that last contract when Ray Shero was here, and boy, that was a long time ago. Was that 2013, I believe, was when he signed that contract? He obviously got a lot of money, and rightfully so, because he was one of the 5 to 6 best players in the league at that time. I mean, he still is one of the top 10, in my opinion, best players in the league when he's fully on his game. I know he's been a bit banged up recently, but, the Geno Machino, he's probably one of the more underrated players in NHL history, at least in my opinion. But at that time, that was when it was a different, salary cap, different CBA and all that. So I wasn't surprised that he got 8 times 9.5. Honestly, he could have gotten more. But that contract was seen when he signed it as a bit of a hometown discount because, again, he 100% could have gotten 10 and a half, 11 million per, something like that. And the fact that they got him at 9.5, I mean, that was a discount. That's only $800K more than what Sidney Crosby is still getting on that contract. And he signed that contract, I believe it was a year or two before, if I'm not mistaken. So I really do think, again, Pittsburgh should be able to get him. If it's 3 years, I'm thinking 7, 7.2, 7.5. If you can get him below 8, that's a steal. Now, if it's 4 years, I'm thinking 28 million, 29 total million, 30 million, 31, something like that. 3 years, 21, 22, 20, 22 and a half million, something like that. I think that would be a really nice contract for Geno. We'll have to see what Ron Hextall and Brian Burke want to do with that contract. But I think that's probably what the Penguins should do. At least that's what I would do if I were Hextall and Brian Burke. So we'll have to see when we get some clarity on that contract negotiation. It's been very quiet. I think that's what Ron Hextall and Brian Burke like. I'm sure at some point we will get rumors and confirmation that the two sides have been talking. But as of right now, there has been nothing concrete as of yet. Now, going into Geno's potential return date, it looks like it's going to happen right before the Western trip. He said today that he's looking to get into games during that trip. I'm speculating that I think it's going to be for that Dallas game on January 8th. So not this Saturday, but the following Saturday after that. That puts it at about 10 days at this point. If it is not that game, then it's probably the game against Anaheim on that Tuesday, which would be 13 days from today. So As of right now, I do think we're about 10 to 13 days away when Geno is going to come back. Um, I'm not super surprised by this just because, they're easing him back. They're babying him, and rightfully so. He's 6 months off a major, major knee operation. He basically played on one knee in the playoffs, had 6 points in 4 games, but they want to make sure that he's fully healthy for the rest of the season just because look how good this team has been this season. I mean, the upper management and Mike Sullivan and probably the rest of the team, they probably have sensed that this is one of their last years at really contending for a Stanley Cup. They want to make sure that they are not rushing back one of their best players. I'm perfectly fine with them taking their time. The team has won 7 in a row at this point, so we'll see what happens in that regard. But do not expect Geno to play this Sunday against the Sharks or Wednesday against the Blues or the Flyers. Now, could it happen? Sure, if he's feeling up to it and he's feeling a bit better than normal, he definitely could make a return. But as of right now, do not bet on it. That's for sure. I know he was skating on the second line with Heinen and Carter today, but it's probably going to be Carter on Sunday and not Geno at this point. Now, for the rest of the lines, they were a little bit interesting. I mean, you're going to have Juuso Riikola and Mark Friedman as your third defensive pair, Pettersson with Ruido on your second pair, Letang Dumoulin, obviously. Ashton Reese was with Drew O'Connor and Brock McGinn today. That's an interesting combination. And then Kasperi Kapanen and Brian Boyle were on the fourth line with Lafferty out today as well. So the team might have to have another forward in there. But I think Pittsburgh is also hoping that they can get a player back this Sunday that's asymptomatic, that tests negative a couple of times due to these new protocols. It does look like that Bjorkquist will probably be making his NHL debut on Sunday. And, I touched on this on my Monday episode. This is a player that, we really have not seen a lot of other than in just preseason games. He's been playing a lot of Wilkes-Barre, but, he was a high draft pick about, I want to say, was 5 to 6 years ago at this point, and we haven't seen him play yet at the NHL level. So I want to see how his development has been going. Obviously, he's going to play in the bottom 6. He's not going to play in the top 6 here unless the whole team tests positive for COVID or something like that. But, he's still a player that I'm definitely intrigued by. I want to see just how it's been going for him down in Wilkes-Barre. Drew O'Connor with Ashton Reese and McGinn, that's an interesting third line. I want to see more of O'Connor. I know he kind of fell off a little bit since having that great start of the season, but, this is still a much different player than what we saw last season, where it looked like he was an ECHL player, at least in my opinion. So I'm excited, to see what he can do in a top 9 role for this team. Now, before we get to our last segment, where I'm going to touch on some of these postponements and why I just think it's kind of a little bit of BS for the NHL. If I can find this here. So, Jackson Hollister, if you're listening to this episode, thank you so much for sending this question. And he said, with all these players out with COVID, would it count against the cap? Just because, he asked the question with Geno, Rust, and Gensel playing the game this weekend, we will be over the cap with COVID, and asked if I had any insight on that. So did a little bit of digging, Jackson. I do not think, I checked a couple cap friendly and all that. It doesn't look like it would count against the cap for the Penguins. And it looks like only Gensel and Rust are coming back for the game on Sunday. At least that's how I'm taking it right now. So either way, the Penguins are not going to be over the cap regardless. So I wanted to give you that answer on today's episode, just give you a little bit of clarity on that. Also, Geno is on LTIR right now. So even with the returns of all those players in COVID protocol and Gensel and Rust, who are not on LTIR to begin with, they will be fine cap wise. So again, thank you so much for sending in that question. I really do appreciate that. Again, coming up after this commercial break, we're going to get into some of these postponements for the games up in Canada and why it's just whatever. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So I understood why the Penguins game against the Leafs this week was postponed, just because the Leafs had a lot of players in COVID protocol. Sheldon Keefe was in COVID protocol. Penguins are having a huge outbreak. It didn't make sense to play that game, right? But the game against Ottawa, I think, is just total BS for why that got postponed. And it wasn't just that game; it was other games in Canada as well, and it was due to limited attendance. And it's just like the NHL is such a joke in that regard because you're not taking player safety seriously, but you're postponing a game due to not having a lot of fans there just because it's money reasons. I mean, what are we doing here? I don't get that at all. That game should be played. I think, at least in my opinion, the Penguins have a healthy-ish roster to play. I know that the Senators do as well. Matt Murray was probably getting ready to start in that game too. So, I mean, the NHL really doesn't have to be just go out here penny grabbing. I hate that for the league. I think it's total. I almost said a bad word there. I think it's total BS. It just makes the integrity of the sport just look really stupid in my eyes. I mean, it was a 1 o'clock game. It's New Year's Eve. These teams haven't played in so long. There's no reason to postpone that game due to attendance issues. I mean, I understand, the league office, they're trying to get money back just because they lost so much money during this pandemic. But you know what? Tough crap right now. I mean, these teams are ready to go for the most part, at least. I know some players are in COVID protocol, but this game was on track to be being played, but now you're postponing that in a few other games in Canada because you're not having the attendance that you want, unlike it is in the United States. So that just really is a joke to me, at least in my opinion. I really don't get that. Switching gears a little bit, Penguins do have a big game on Sunday against the Sharks. San Jose is not that good this season. They're kind of a middling 500 team. They played a ridiculous 8-7 game against Arizona on Tuesday night. San Jose was up by 2 goals multiple times, allowed the Coyotes to come back. Did not expect Arizona to even score 7 goals once this season. But San Jose, Timo Meier has been great. Tomas Hertl is awesome. If they fall out of the playoff race, I would love if Pittsburgh would somehow go out and get him. He is that would be a slam dunk acquisition, even though this team is as deep as it is. Erik Karlsson's turned back the clock a little bit. Logan Couture has played well. Brent Burns, he's kind of falling off a little bit. But, the Sharks are a bit better than what I thought they would be this year. But it's still, they're not a playoff team, at least in my opinion. But that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I really appreciate you all listening to this one. We'll be back with another episode on Thursday, and then we'll close out on Friday, just with a year-end review for the Penguins. We're going to go over the best goal, in my view, best game, best moment, all that stuff. That's going to be coming over these next couple of days for what you can look forward to for the podcast. And, of course, we will do a full Sharks preview, going into the underlying numbers and all that jazz. So thank you all so much for listening to this one, and I will be back with another episode on Thursday.